in this together. And
Yes,
indeed
yes.
we are.
Always in this together. She also has messaged me in this, and welcome to the Poet Speak of for Poets. We are the world, we are the people. Sixth episode of Poets Speak of Poets. It's all about knowing and getting to know, bringing the world closer. Uh, Today we have um, Miss Margaret, Miss Marianne Tefft, Lennart Lundh, and Mona Zamfirescu. So they would be talking about the respective poets. I have along with me a former professor, Dr. Rupali Sarkargar of Venkateswara College, Delhi University, who would also be co-hosting this show. Uh, in the last episode, where like we talked about in the first sixth episode, fifth episode, Richard talked about Dr. John Cooper Clarke and Mr. Henry N. L. Jones talked about Nikki Giovanni, Cheryl J. Jackson, Gwendolyn Brooks, and Lisa Tomei. Jonaville talked about Rita Dove. In this episode, Marianne would be talking about Horace Thomas. Margaret would be talking about Horace Thomas. Marianne Tefft would be talking about Margaret Atwood. Lennart Lundh would be talking about Carl Sandburg. And Mona Zamfirescu would be talking about Jane Hirshfield topic. So, without wasting much of your time, I would go across to my mentor, of course, and mother, my Dr. Rupali Sarkar, to kickstart this program, and we share a few, points of yours. Over to you, ma'am.
Namaste and good evening from here in India. It's nearly 9 o'clock at night. And welcome, dear poets who are friends. This is a very special program that Prasanna and I have decided to hold because we've been reading our poetry and we've been reading it on many platforms, but somehow, somewhere, I one day felt that we were forgetting some of our great poets and many of the poets that we hadn't heard about. We would like to know about them. And, like I've been a, university teacher, but it's been some 10 years now. And, one is out of the classroom, and so one is not reading a lot. And it's a wonderful platform where we can just come to know about other poets. And we'd also feel very honored. I personally, and on behalf of Prasanna, feel very honored to have you people here, yourself erudite poets and scholars, to tell us about other poets who are renowned, but many of us may not sometimes know about them or know many of the aspects of those poets. We would have read it very superficially or heard about them, uh, and I'm looking forward to listening to you all. I'll begin with a very dear friend and somebody I have worked with across. What do you call it? Across the cyberspace, across the miles, a soul connection, some deep feeling and bonding that I have with Margaret Blake. We've done a lot of work together. And so I read out her bio with great pleasure. Margaret Blake is an ordained minister in the Anglican Church and a social activist living in Wales, UK. She writes both poetry and prose, fiction and non-fiction, and has won various awards for her work. She has been published in several anthologies, both online and in print. As co-administrator of the Aspiring Writers Society for a number of years, she has been involved in editing their e-zines as well as being a co-editor for the anthology Seasons of Change, reflecting today and dreaming tomorrow. She's been published across many international anthologies, and she writes wonderfully. And she's a very compassionate and a very exacting editor, I must say. Thank you so much, Margaret. When I say compassionate, because I think we as writers, we are so nervous when we, submit our work. We hope that it'll be liked, and and then you've come across an editor like Margaret, somebody who looks so deeply into your work. So I'm sure that today, when she talked about the great poet R.S. Thomas, that we will learn a lot more than we ever knew about him. Thank you so much, Margaret.
Thank you, Rupali, for such a generous introduction. Thank you. And can I say it's good to be with you and with Prasanna and the other poets on this platform. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I'd like to introduce, if you haven't already met him, Ronald Stewart Thomas, known as R.S. Thomas, a Welshman from the 20th century, 1913 to 2000. Please do not confuse him with the other great Welsh poet, Dylan Thomas. Their lifestyles are very different. R.S. Thomas was Anglican priest and a prolific poet. He was noted for Welsh nationalism, spirituality, and a deep dislike of the modern era. Maybe some of us can share that as well. He loved nature, going on long walks in his beloved countryside. And much of his poetry reflects the harsh landscape of the upland northern hills of Wales and the hill farmers who eke out a living on there. And at the same time, his faith shines through some of his other poems. Not, I hasten to add, a cosy religiosity, but an honest, austere spirituality which sought and found meaning in and amongst everyday life. And his poetry reflects that. He spoke Welsh, but wrote mainly in English. He was a nominee for the Nobel Prize for Literature in the 1990s and awarded the prestigious Lifetime Achievement by the Lundh Foundation in 1996. Most of his poems are really quite short, although we wrote longer ones too. And so I want to share with you, if time permits, 6 poems, but reflecting 3 different aspects, 2 from each section: the personal, the spiritual, and the Wales. So without further ado, let's start with the children's song, written in 1955. I think a reflection of his childhood holidays on the Welsh beaches, but a wonderfully acute observation of adult behaviour. We live in our own world, a world that is too small for you to stoop and enter, even on hands and knees, the adult subterfuge. And though you probe and pry with analytic eye, and eavesdrop all our talk with an amused look, you cannot find the centre, where we dance, where we play, where life is still asleep under the closed flower, under the smooth shell of eggs in the cupped nest that mock the faded blue of your remoter heaven. So, if anybody wants to comment on that, do I pause between poems for people to say, or do I just press on? Okay, well, let's give you the other personal one then, which is called A Marriage, written in 1992, a year after his wife died. We married for obviously over 50 years. A Marriage. We met under a shower of bird notes. 50 years passed. Love's moment in a world in solitude, in a world in servitude to time. She was young. I kissed my eyes closed and opened them on her wrinkles. Come, said Death, choosing her as his partner for the last dance. And she, who in life had done everything with a bird's grace, opened her bill now with a shedding of one sigh, no heavier than a feather. I just think that's such a beautiful poem. And the children's one, I love the way he says that, you probe and pry with your analytic eye, but we've got our own world, that you're shut out from. And as Marianne's just picked up, bird's notes to one side is just, I think that's just so beautiful. I can quite easily fill up when I read that. With a bird's grace owned her bill now for the shedding of one sigh, no heavier than a feather. How is carried the imagery from the beginning through to the end, and refers to the time as, you know, the world being in servitude to time. Time holds us prisoner in so many ways, doesn't it? And then it's come and gone. So does anybody want to say anything about either of those two themselves? Oh. Okay. I don't know whether that's a good sign or a bad sign. Or whether I'm supposed to say more about the poems. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do here. Anyway, The Bright Field, again, is a poem that moved me enormously. Yes, it has got allusions to verses in Christian scripture. It's an illusion, but it's just got such a vibe, such a message for all of us. It's about finding the unexpected, the transcendent, the numinous, the divine, whatever you want to call it, in the midst of everyday life. The Bright Field. I have seen the sun break through to illuminate a small field for a while, and gone my way and forgotten it. But that was the pearl of great price, the one field that had treasure in it. I realise now that I must give all that I have to possess it. Life is not hurrying on to a receding future, nor hankering after an imagined past. It is the turning aside, like Moses, to the miracle of the lit bush, to a brightness that seemed as transitory as your youth once, but is the eternity that awaits you. And I think in today's day and age, there's a lot of talk now of mindfulness and being aware of that other dimension to life. And I think he just encapsulates that beautifully in those lines in this one poem. So, a brightness is transitory as your youth. My youth is long gone, but it's part, what has been and is now, is part of the eternity that's still to come. And I just think that's brilliant expressions. And then a poem which is a bit more challenging, and I've read this and had people challenge me about it, saying, don't understand that can't be right. It's called Kneeling. And again, there's a lot of imagery woven into the lines, and a lot of thought to be thought about by the time you get to the end. Moments of great calm, kneeling before an altar made of wood in a stone church, in summer, waiting for the God to speak. The air, a staircase for silence. The sun's light ringing me as though I acted a great role, and the audiences still. All that close throng of spirits waiting as I, for the message. Prompts me, God, but not yet. When I speak, though it be you who speak through me, something is lost. The meaning is in the waiting. So it can be quite challenging, but again, lots of lovely imagery. And yeah, somebody's just flashed it. I haven't been able to read the chat because I'm reading my poem, but I got the gist of what went up on the screen. Yeah, there's reminiscence of other poems in there. This was, I forget when this was written, I think perhaps 1955, but I haven't dated that one. So yeah, the meaning is in the waiting. Sometimes we're in such a rush to get everywhere that when it comes, it hasn't got the fullness that it would have come when revealed in its own time. So, all right for time, Prasanna? Two poems now to do with his reflections on Wales and his Welsh nationalism. The first one's called A Iago Prysych, and even so, as an English person, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But Iago was, R.S. Thomas used as an archetype virtually for the Irish hill farmer or the Irish peasant, the Irish labourer, and several of his poems are addressed to him or about him. But I like this one because it begins by calling him his friend. Ah, Iago, my friend, whom the ignorant people thought the last of your kind, since all the wealth you brought from the age of gold was the yellow dust on your shoes, spilled by the meadow flowers. If you should choose to rescue your barns from the wind and the weather's claws, and break the hold of the moss on roof and gable, if you can till your fields and stand to see the world go by, a foolish tapestry scrawled by the times, and lead your mares to stable, and dream your dream, and after the earth's laws order your life in faith, then you shall be the first man of the new community. Again, bringing forth that gold from the past that we need to hear for the future and in the present. And then the last one I have is, I suppose you could almost call it a eulogy for his beloved Wales. You have to, I think, live in Wales and hear them speak and read their stories, both historical and mythical, to realise what a rich and turbulent time and quite an oppressed time they have. And that may well ring true for lots of people around the world. The English were the oppressors, or at least the Norman English were the oppressors. So anyway, Welsh landscapes, and it reflects this dwelling of, well, let me read it and then you can make up your own mind. To live in Wales is to be conscious at dusk of the spilled blood that went into the making of the wild sky, dyeing the immaculate rivers in all their courses. It is to be aware, above the noisy tractor and hum of the machine, excuse me, to be aware above the noisy tractor and hum of the machine of strife in the strong woods, vibrant with sped arrows. You cannot live in the present, at least not in Wales. There is the language, for instance, the soft consonants strange to the ear. There are cries in the dark at night, as owls answer the moon, and thick ambush of shadows hushes at the field's corners. There is no present in Wales and no future. There is only the past, brittle with relics, wind-bitten towers and castles with sham ghosts, mouldering quarries in mines, and an impotent people sick with inbreeding, worrying the carcass of an old song. Not exactly the most optimistic of ones. I'll read your full comment in a minute, Neil. But I loved the way he said, it was above the noisy machine, of strife in the strung woods, vibrant with sped arrows, the juxtaposition of strung, you know, a string of a bow as it pulls on the arrows, or the arrow you pull ready for the arrow, and his brittle relics of the past. And there again, worrying the carcass of an old song. Sometimes it feels a bit, to me as an observer, I've been here 20 years now, but still an observer, as if they've got to chew over the past and keep bringing it up. And again, worrying the carcass of an old song is quite a powerful image, I think. You know, the carcass, something's dead, it's an old song, but they're still gnawing at it. So I think it's just so brilliantly written, as I think all his poetry is written. So I hope that gives you a flavour of R.S. Thomas, and you might like to explore him further for yourselves. Thank you for listening.
Great, Margaret. Great, thank you for, introducing us to Bali, ma'am.
What can I say? A wonderful presentation. And I think you selected a poet who's really belongs to your heart. You're a minister yourself, and you're an activist, which is what R.S. Thomas himself is. It's very interesting. I read up just a very little bit before, to know about him before I came on this program. And his connection with the common people, his the way he looked at it, and there is no even the way he looked at the Bible, as more of poetry, as a spiritual book, not so much as a religious book, as a spiritual book, which is what makes him so deeply also welcome into, as an Indian, with an Indian thought that, apparently I read his son said to a biographer that he would go on and on about using machinery and how refrigerators and all these things were, cluttering up the world and so on. And we are really beginning to feel that way, aren't we? We now strongly feel that way, that in order to, really be in touch with the spiritual self, we have to get rid of all these gadgets. And he was talking about it some time ago, when the people he was talking to apparently didn't own these things, but were longing for them. And also his poem Peasant, and the poems that you read out, so deeply moving. Thank you so much, Margaret. I wish I could go on listening to him, but you have introduced me into something that I wasn't so deeply involved with, and that's what the success of this program is. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rupali. Yeah.
Very
And he was a
succinct.
man who lived what he talked. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
Very succinct and crisp and a pitch. Little time. Beautiful. That's the way as poet's reflection. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for talking about Thomas. Our next poet would be talking about Margaret Atwood. Let's see. Marianne Tefft. Marianne Tefft is a poet and a voiceover reader who delights as a Montessori teacher in Toronto, Canada. Her poems and short stories have appeared online, in print, and on air in North America, Europe, Asia, and the Caribbean. Her work has been nominated for Best of the Net and the Pushcart Prize 2025. She is the author of Full Moon Fire, Spoken Songs of Love, and Moonchild, Poems for Moon Lovers. So Marianne would be introducing us Margaret in her perspective. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prasanna. Great to see you, Rupali. Thank you so much for introducing this event. And Margaret, what a lovely introduction to R.S. Thomas. Thank you so much for it. I am really pleased to have the opportunity to speak about Margaret Atwood here in Canada. We have a pantheon of female writers who have graced the world stage: Margaret Lawrence, Alice Munro, and of course, Margaret Atwood, who is the only one who is still with us among those writers. And she is surely the grande dame of Canadian letters at this moment. For 6 decades, she has been among Canada's most celebrated and influential writers. She is internationally known for her novels, beginning with An Edible Woman, Alias Grace, Oryx and Crake, and of course, more recently again, her 1985 work, A Handmaid's Tale, has re-arisen in public consciousness as a timely and masterful work of dystopian speculative fiction. Since debuting as a poet in 1961 and publishing her first novel in 1969, Margaret Atwood, however, has built a multi-genre body of work that comprises essays, short stories, children's books, radio plays, and, lesser known than her novels perhaps, but unreasonably so, 18 collections of poetry. Her work has been translated into more than 40 languages. She is highly regarded for her sharp intellect, her vivid imagination, and she has earned numerous awards for her novels and her poetry, including the Booker, the Giller Prize, and Canada's Governor General's Award. Importantly, on the Canadian stage, Margaret Atwood is incredibly well respected as a feminist and an environmental activist. She was she was born in November of 1939 in our nation's capital, Ottawa, but as a result of her father's work as an entomologist, she was raised largely in remote areas of northern Ontario and Quebec, and those are areas that we in Canada always refer to as the Shield. The Canadian Shield is the great Cambrian rock and boreal forests that stretch across the north of those provinces, and they are places where, when we speak about the provincial bird, we mean the mosquito. So this was a kind of an uncomfortable upbringing for Margaret. And from young, she developed an appreciation for solitude in nature, and her understanding of the demands of isolation and survival influenced her writing, particularly her poetry. Later on, she went on to earn a bachelor's degree in English at the University of Toronto, where I am located here today, and a master's degree at Radcliffe College. Her, excuse me, her poetry is characterized by its clarity and precision and its vivid imagery. It's often deeply personal and indeed quite politically charged. She explores the intersection of people and the environment, power dynamics, and always the role of women. She frequently uses satire and irony to critique societal norms and injustices, particularly involving women and their agency in society. Many of her poems examine power dynamics within personal and societal relationships. And of course, she often employs nature as a symbol of human strength and vulnerability, and that recurring theme is survival in all its forms: emotional, physical, and social. I'd like to share with you a few poems of Margaret Atwood's today. The first of these is called "This is a Photograph of Me." It was first published in The Circle Game in 1966, which brought Margaret to early attention. It begins as a sort of innocuous description of a photograph of the speaker and becomes more unsettling as it reveals hidden meaning. It explores the themes of identity, perception, self-representation, and the limitations of images. It analyzes the gap between what is seen and what is real, while the photograph acts as a metaphor for the self, suggesting that people are often misunderstood or misrepresented by their external appearance. This is a photograph of me by Margaret Atwood. It was taken some time ago. At first, it seems to be a smeared print, blurred lines and gray flecks blended with the paper. Then, as you scan it, you see in the left-hand corner a thing that is like a branch, part of a tree, balsam or spruce, emerging, and to the right, halfway up, what ought to be a gentle slope, a small frame house. In the background, there is a lake, and beyond that, some low hills. The photograph was taken the day after I drowned. I am in the lake, in the center of the picture, just on. It is difficult to say where precisely or to say how large or small I am. The effect of water on light is a distortion, but if you look long enough, eventually you will be able to see me. Next, I'd like to share Siren Song, which was first published in You Are Happy in 1974. Here, Margaret Atwood takes the siren's perspective, and this poem speaks to feminism, power, manipulation, and desire. It presents the siren's song as a trap for sailors and an act of manipulation, and it critiques the romanticization of female roles in literature and society. The siren's song becomes a metaphor for the way society historically has viewed women as both alluring and dangerous. Atwood's portrayal of the siren exposes the complexity of women's power and their ability to influence others, often at a cost. Siren Song by Margaret Atwood. This is the one song everyone would like to learn, the song that is irresistible, the song that forces men to leap overboard in squadrons, even though they see the beached skulls. The song nobody knows, because anyone who has heard it is dead, and the others can't remember. Shall I tell you the secret? And if I do, will you get me out of this bird suit? I don't enjoy it here, squatting on this island, looking picturesque and mythical with these two feathery maniacs. I don't enjoy singing this trio, fatal and valuable. I will tell the secret to you, only to you. Come closer. This song is a cry for help. Help me. Only you can. You are unique at last. Alas, it is a boring song, but it works every time. Next, The Woman Who Could Not Live with Her Faulty Heart, from Selected Poems 2 in 1986. Here, exploring the themes of self-criticism, social pressure, and personal struggle, this poem features a woman who is paralyzed by the weight of her faults and imperfections. It highlights the guilt and psychological toll of self-criticism and the societal expectations placed on women. Here, the poem powerfully explores how women are socialized to bear emotional and psychological weight of unrealistic standards, which they are then taught to understand as personal mistakes and flaws. The Woman Who Could Not Live with Her Faulty Heart by Margaret Atwood. I do not mean the symbol of love, a candy shape to decorate cakes with, the heart that is supposed to belong or break. I mean this lump of muscle that contracts like a flayed biceps, purple-blue with its skin of suet, its skin of gristle, this isolate, this caved hermit, unshelled turtle, this one lungful of blood, no happy plateful. All hearts float in their own deep oceans of no light, wet black and glimmering, their four mouths gulping like fish. Hearts are said to pound. This is to be expected, the heart's regular struggle against being drowned. But most hearts say, I want, I want, I want, I want. My heart is more duplicitous, though to twin, as I once thought, it says, I want, I don't want, I want. And then a pause. It forces me to listen. And at night, it is the infrared third eye that remains open while the other two are sleeping, but refuses to say what it has seen. It is a constant pestering in my ears, a caught moth, limping drum, a child's fist beating itself against the bed springs. I want, I don't want. How can one live with such a heart? Long ago, I gave up singing to it. It will never be satisfied or lulled. One night, I will say to it, heart, be still, and it will. And finally, I'd like to share Helen of Troy Does Countertop Dancing, from Morning in the Burned House, 1995. Here, Margaret Atwood gives voice to Helen of Troy in a poem that reimagines Helen as a strip club dancer. She uses humor and irony to explore themes of power, objectification, and identity. Of course, Atwood portrays Helen as the physically beautiful woman of myth, in control of her sexuality and power. The poem addresses how women are commodified and the ways in which they reclaim agency over their bodies. Helen of Troy does countertop dancing. by Margaret Atwood. The world is full of women who'd tell me I should be ashamed of myself if they had the chance. Quit dancing. Get some self-respect and a day job. Right. And minimum wage and varicose veins, just standing in one place for 8 hours behind a glass counter bundled up to the neck, instead of naked as a meat sandwich. Selling gloves or something instead of what I do sell. You have to have talent to peddle a thing so nebulous and without material form. Exploited, they'd say. Yes, any way you cut it. But I've a choice of how, and I'll take the money. I do give value. Like preachers, I sell vision. Like perfume ads, desire. Or its facsimile. Like jokes or war, it's all in the timing. I sell men back their worst suspicions that everything's for sale and piecemeal. They gaze at me and see a chainsaw murder just before it happens, when thigh, ass, inkblot, crevice, tit, and nipple are still connected. Such hatred leaps in them, my beery worshippers, that or a bleary, hopeless love. Seeing the rows of heads and upturned eyes, imploring but ready to snap at my ankles, I understand floods and earthquakes and the urge to step on ants. I keep the beat and dance for them because they can't. The music smells like foxes, crisp as heated metal, searing the nostrils, or humid as August, hazy and languorous as a looted city the day after, when all the rape's been done already, and the killing, and the survivors wander around looking for garbage to eat, and there's only a bleak exhaustion. Speaking of which, it's the smiling tires me out the most. This and the pretense that I can't hear them. And I can't because I'm, after all, a foreigner to them. The speech here is all warty gutturals, obvious as a slab of ham. But I come from the province of the gods, where meanings are lilting and oblique. I don't let on to everyone, but lean close and I'll whisper, my mother was raped by a holy swan. You believe that? You can take me out to dinner. That's what we tell all the husbands. There sure are a lot of dangerous birds around. Not that anyone here but you would understand. The rest of them would like to watch me and feel nothing, reduce me to components, as in a clock factory or an abattoir, crush out the mystery, wall me up alive in my own body. They'd like to see through me, but nothing is more opaque than absolute transparency. Look, my feet don't hit the marble. Like breath or a balloon, I'm rising. I hover 6 inches in the air in my blazing swan egg of light. You think I'm not a goddess? Try me. This is a torch song. Touch me and you'll burn. In conclusion, I'd like to simply repeat that for 6 decades, Margaret Atwood has mentored and inspired emerging writers through workshops, lectures, and her presence in Canadian literary circles. She has shaped Canadian literature and poetry with her bold voice, her rich imagery, and her thought-provoking themes. She has played a key role in raising awareness about issues of gender, environmental justice, and indeed the future of our planet. And I think it is no surprise to any of us who do appreciate Margaret Atwood that her work continues to resonate with readers, inspiring new generations to think critically about the world and our place in it. Thank you so much, poet friends, today for allowing me to reintroduce you to Canada's great Margaret Atwood.
And we love it, Marianne. Amazing.
Thank you.
Embodiment.
My pleasure.
What a fantastic presentation. And
Oh,
the
thank
way
you.
yes, and the way you read those poems out, were absolutely mesmerizing.
Thank
And
you.
I would have to say that Margaret Atwood should be thankful to you for reading her poems out in the way you did, so that every word, conveyed its meaning to us. And I just again read your bio to check up on you, and I found that you're You're not only a teacher, but you're also voiceover that you do. You're a poet performer. You're a perfect poet performer, and I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And I
Thank
happen to teach undergraduate students the poem, this photograph of mine or something. What is it? There's this photograph. I couldn't, really make my students understand that poem. It wasn't easy, you know. The picture in the lake and the
Yes.
emerging, and the fact that as a feminist writer, she, women all over the world, it doesn't matter what color we come from. We can't isolate ourselves from the fact that we're always being made to do things or be something that we are not. And she has put that across so well, and so have you. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for this great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rupali. It really was my pleasure. And I have to confess, of course, every Canadian reads Margaret Atwood at
Yes.
different points in his or her life, but she's never been an absolute personal favorite of mine. Still, it's quite clear that she's the Canadian writer who must be presented in this moment. So it really was an opportunity for me to get to know her a
So
little
that's
bit more as a
wonderful.
woman and a writer. So I consider it quite a privilege. I had to change my own personal stance a little bit on this. So that was a really nice way to open my year. And as you mentioned this about the difficulty of presenting, this is a photograph of me. Something that struck me that would not strike younger readers. That idea of the photograph or the image emerging from the lake, we all have the experience of the darkroom where images were
Yes.
developed and they appeared as if out of liquid, which is what they were doing.
And what came to my mind was, you remember we used to have these stamps with pictures of butterflies and all, and we dip it in water and then it would
Yes.
emerge with a picture. Something like that came to my mind. But I did find it difficult to teach my students this poem. They were not very, understanding it, but it was so deeply etched in my mind that I did, you took it up to read it. I was thinking of reading it out. I said, it's my favorite poem. Something, and as a teacher, you fail sometimes to, but you did a great job. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And I do agree with Neil that, she should get the Nobel Prize. Yes, I was thinking the same thing, that she should. I mean, she's a poet of that caliber. Thank you so much.
The pleasure was mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. Our next poet is really, such an honor having him, Lennart Lundh, who will be talking about Karl Sandburg's, who Pali ma'am would be introducing. Lennart.
No, isn't it Mona who's going to be reading now?
Lennart Lundh.
Okay, I don't. 1 second. Okay, so Lennart is a poet, very short bio. Lennart Lundh is a poet, photographer, historian, and short fictionist. His work has appeared internationally since 1965. Thank you so much. You're welcome. You seem, your bio, I'm sure, is much bigger, but you're not telling us. You're hiding something. Thank you so much. You're most welcome this evening.
Thank you. Thank you. The bio is short because I believe that if I'm reading you my poetry, or if you are sitting reading my poetry, it doesn't matter what else I've written or how much I've written. It's whether you are somehow impacted by the single piece that's in front of you or falling into your ears. I've got 30 books of poetry. I've got 6 books of history, 2 collections of short fiction. I've done perhaps 60 or 70 cover photos for anthologies and books and magazines and so on. None of that matters. None of that matters. What matters is what kind of things I do and but I'm not brand new to the field. So anyway,
Well, thank you so much. Prasanna and I like to show off our friends. So I'm glad you told us you've written so. We do like to show off.
I'm very aw shucks about what I do. Marianne and Neil can tell you that, and Mona can tell you that. We've met at so many open mics. Carl Sanburg. I met Sanburg in 1963, not physically met him, but met his work. In my high school library as a sophomore in high school, I found a still in the box copy of his work, Honey and Salt. And I unwrapped it and I made it mine for several days while I read it before the library got it back. He made me a poet. He made me a lover of poetry. What I learned about poetry in grammar school and in high school was Shakespeare and Whitman and form poetry. Okay, it was all rhyme and meter and all of that stuff. Sanburg, he believed and he fought for, especially in the early part of the 20th century, he fought for the idea that form follows function. And for him, that form had to be free verse. Okay. Exactly the right word in exactly the right place, regardless of rhyme patterns, regardless of meter, common language. I've got about 800 pages worth of Sanburg's poetry in 2 books on the table in front of me right now. His completed poems and Honey and Salt. And you don't need to run for an encyclopedia. You don't need to check for a dictionary to understand the words that he's using. He uses very common language. He uses language that I'm jealous of because it is so understandable. Along with the idea of form versus function, he teaches us that good poetry takes the personal and makes it universally understandable. He also takes the universal events and makes us react to them individually. Okay. He establishes a relationship. I probably should use the past term when I talk about him, because he died in 1967. But his poetry is still very much alive. It's not taught very much. I've had arguments with friends who thought I was crazy for liking Sanburg instead of Frost. You know, he was not an academic. He spent maybe a year at a college in Illinois. He spent a couple months at West Point before he was thrown out because he wasn't good at math and things like that. He was a manual laborer for a living. He was a soldier for a living. He was a traveling salesman. He was a father and a husband and a great-grandfather, I believe. And this is what he reflects in his work. It is not the academics. It is the common everyday experiences. For example, part 20 of The People, Yes, which is all by itself a book. He starts and says, "Who shall speak for the people? Who knows the works from A to Z so he can say, I know what the people want. Who is this Fanon? Where did he come from?" And that is what he was chasing. His overarching themes, all fell beneath this sort of observation. You know, the fog creeps in on little cat's feet. Chicago being the hog butcher of the world. Very common, but very precisely and visually through his words, accessible. He was a poet, he was a reporter, he was a historian, he was a storyteller, he was a songwriter, and he received relatively little recognition. He got a couple Pulitzer Prizes, 3 of them that I'm aware of, and he never stopped writing. His collected poems, all 700 pages of them, was released in 1950. There are still volumes of his poetry appearing from the archives that he never published. Okay, and this is 75 years later. You know, his work is still coming to us. Some examples. He could write at great length. Time Sweep is 16 pages. The People Yes is an entire book. The title poem for Honey and Salt is 4 pages long. But he also wrote quickly, shortly, to the point. Wingtip. The birds, are they worth remembering? Is flight a wonder and one wingtip a space marvel? When will man know what the birds know? Bird footprints. The footprint of a bird in sand brought your face. I said, what of it? And the next lone footprint of a bird in the sand brought your face again. I said, it is written deeper than sand. I saw a bird wing fixed 40,000 years in a rock. A bird wing bringing your foot, your wrist. That's, 7 lines of poetry, and it just encompasses an entire world that anybody can sit down who has ever thought about love or been in love or lost love can immediately associate with. He was also very lyrical. Find the right pages once in a while here. Love is a deep and a dark and a lonely. Love is a deep and a dark and a lonely, and you take it deep, take it dark, and take it with a lonely winding. And when the winding gets too lonely, then may come the wildflowers. And the breath of wind over many flowers, winding its way out of many lonely flowers, waiting in rain leaf whispers, waiting in dry stalks of noon, wanting in a music of wind breaths. That is every bit as lyrical. And again, every word, the right word in the right place as Shakespeare, the primary poet that I was raised on as a school child. He was also very humble through all of this. He won numerous awards for his stands on civil rights as a general thing. Margaret Atwood has her women's rights, and that's a reflection of this generation of poets. She and I started writing at about the same time, even though she's 9 years older than me. So we share a generational relationship there. And Sanburg was from an earlier generation where civil rights were a broad field, moving their way to becoming more specific. But he was always humble. In his notes for a preface to the completed poems, he says, all my life I have been trying to learn to read, to see and hear, and to write. This is when he was in his 60s, okay? I should like to think that as I go on writing, there will be sentences truly alive, with verbs quivering, with nouns giving color and echoes. It could be, in the grace of God, I shall live to be 89, as did Hokusai. And speaking my farewell to earthly scenes, I might paraphrase. If God had let me live 5 years longer, I should have been a poet. Yeah, I've been in love with his work for an awful long time, and this just brushes the surface. As an old college professor of mine once said at the end of every class, comments, questions, cuss words.
Excellent. It's great to know that you had a close association with Sanburg. And much to the delight that you always, every spring, take out a book to raise the funds for children. So, buddy, man.
Oh yeah, yeah. He was a children's writer. He wrote songs. He was in love with the idea of the common folk music and the humor and so on. I had a girlfriend once, and we were sitting in the sunroom at her mother's house, listening to a record of Sanburg singing. My name is Jan Janssen. I come from Wisconsin. I work in a lumber mill there. And the people I meet as they walk down the street, they say, hey, what's your name? And I say, my name is Jan Janssen. I come from Wisconsin. I work in a lumber mill there. Yeah, you know. I don't denigrate any of the great poems, any of the great poets. To each their own, you know. We each have our own experiences, our own way of expressing those experiences. But Sanburg takes no work at all to memorize and to carry with you in your head for, shit, that was back in the 60s. So for 60 years now, I've carried that song with me. So thank you for listening, letting me babble. And Mona, I think it's going to be all yours. Looking forward to this.
But yes, privilege is ours, and such an honor of having you on this occasion. It was, saying few words about Sandberg, and moreover, when you met him, and this is something great, and you are a contemporary of Margaret Atwood. Body ma'am.
I thought you were going to read her bio. Are you going to read it?
No, you could, about Lennart's presentation.
Okay. I think Neil could make some comments because he seems to be, I'm terribly impressed, Lennart, because, to be so much influenced and impressed by a poet from the time you're a very young person, as a schoolboy. And then I taught this poem, Chicago. And I remember that, I taught in a college that was very elitist, and the students came from very well-to-do families. And they really didn't connect to that poem. But then every Sunday, I would, we have a program in the university where I was teaching, which is, for children of working class people. And they work in offices and so on in other places. And these young girls would come on a program, on a BA program. undergraduate program on Sundays. And they understood this poem so much more, the city, and it's, the gory part of the city, the hardness of the city, the harshness of the city seemed to get to them much more than I couldn't get across to the other student. So as you said, that each one to himself. Poetry is something that, we all endorse. We cannot denigrate it. It goes to people different ways. And your presentation was wonderful this evening. But I think, Neil, you would like to say something because very impressed. Why not? I would be happy if you did.
I already said it. I'm speechless. I mean, Lennart, what can I say?
Thank you. Thank you.
You're being humble, sir. Thank you. Let's know about Jane Hirshfield through the voice of Mona Zamfirescu. Is a professor of mathematics. She has been teaching at Baruch College, CUNY since 2023. Although Mona has pursued a career as a mathematician, she is an artist at heart. She delights in poetry, photography, painting, baking, and crafts of all kinds. Mona is an amazing poet, having discovered her passion for poetry late in life. She is determined to learn and grow. A few of her poems have appeared or scheduled to appear in Myri Literature Journal. Her poem American Soldier, Volume 1, Issue 3, 2024 was nominated for Pushcart Prize 2025. Mona is currently enrolled in MFA program in creative writing, poetry at City College of New York, CUNY. Mona will be talking about Jane Hirshfield. Or to Mona.
Thank you very much, Prasanna. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, poet friends, for your presentations. That was just marvelous. I feel very humbled to be here, to be honest, and a little bit awestruck. So I find it hard to sort of talk objectively about someone I love so much. I admire Jane Hirshfield so much. I view her in many ways as a mentor. Yeah, I do want to say a few things. I've gathered excerpts from her bio from the Poetry Foundation website, but I want to just say that I met her at a workshop one time, and I really was impressed with her humility. Like she is for such an award winning poet and essayist and translator, such an active literary citizen who has won so many accolades and praises throughout her life. It was very, very humble and a wonderful presence to be around and learn from. So I find her story very inspiring. So a few things about Jane that I found very interesting. She she wrote her first poem, won her first prize in 1973. That was her first poem published in The Nation, and she won the Discovery Award Prize for that. She graduated from Princeton shortly after, in the first class to graduate women. And it's hard to believe that that was just a little over 50 years ago, 1973. Quite amazing. So she's a well-educated woman. However, after graduating her class, she quit poetry. She quit writing for 8 years to join San Francisco Zen Center. She spent 8 years studying Buddhism and practicing Buddhism. And to quote, in her own words, she would say, "I felt that I'd never make much of a poet if I didn't know more that I knew at the time about what it means to be a human being." I don't think poetry is just based on poetry, but is based on a thoroughly lived life. So I find that extraordinarily inspiring. Her poems hinge on a turning point or a moment on insight. One might say she's a poet of Satori, but she doesn't put it quite so much in these words. She's, like I said, very humble and unassuming and very simple in her poetry. I want to say a few other things, accolades, and yes, it's about, so in Georgia Review, Judith Kitchen said of her books that it's about how to negotiate the difficulties of living while in the same time paying homage to what life has to offer. Her poems are penetrating, and they reveal a quick intelligence and even a quicker intuition. Her intuition is matched by formal assurance of her craft. She is very brief, and brevity of her poems. This is sort of what I wanted to look at. I have her book right here, and I wanted to read some of her poems. They're very quick, short to read, and just another sort of reminder in her own words that for Jane, poetry is an instrument of investigation, a mode of perception, a way of knowing and feeling both self and the world. Jane is interested in poems that find clarity, that find a clarity without simplicity, in a way of thinking and speaking that does not exclude complexity, but also does not obscure. In poems that know the world in many ways at once, heart, mind, voice, and body. And because Lennart already mentioned the form follows function, I want to start with a poem in one of her rare occasions where she's using form. She's mostly writing free verse, but this time I want to start a poem where she's doing both a wonderful job at tackling a form, but also destroying it in the same time. It's called Casal for the End of Time. Break anything, a window, a pie crust, a glacier, it will break open. A voice cannot speak, cannot sing without lips, teeth, lamina propria coming open. Some breakage can rarely be named, hardly be spoken. Rain stopped, roofs said, fires, forests, cities, cellars peeled open. Tears stopped, eyes said, an unhearable music fell instead from them. A clarinet stripped of its breaking, the cello abandoned. The violin grieving, a hand too long, empty, held open. The imperial piano, its 89th, 90th, 91st strings unsummoned, unwoven. Watching, listening like that, the low wordless humming of being unwoven. Fish vanished, bees vanished, bats whitened, Arctic eyes opened. Hens wanted more time, hens thought we had time. Spending time's rivers, its meadows, its mountains, its instruments, turning their silence, its deep mantle broken. Earth stumbled within and outside us. Orca, thistle, kestrel withheld their instruction. Rocks said, burning ones, pry open. You pry your own blindness open. Death said, now I too am an orphan. I think this is a perfect example of form, a form poem that is completely, she took all these liberties with it and essentially changed it and broke it along the way. But what a wonderful metaphor. And yet the rhythm and the essence of a ghazal are there. Here is a shorter one. No wind, no rain. The tree just fell, as piece of fruit does. But no, not fruit, not ripe, not fell. It broke, it shattered. One cone's addition of resinous cell sap, one small-bodied bird arriving to tap for a beetle. It shattered. What word, what act was it we thought it didn't matter? Another favorite of mine, like others. In the end, I was like others, a person, sometimes embarrassed, sometimes afraid. When fire was shouted, some ran towards it, some away. I, neck deep among them. The pawpaw. A woman speaks to me of the pawpaw tree. I have never seen a pawpaw tree. I have never eaten its fruit. I nod. The conversation continues. So many things we think we understand until we stop to think. Her life, my own. A ream of paper. I have a ream of paper, a cartridge of ink, almonds, coffee, a wool scarf for warmth. Whatever handcuffs the soul, I have brought here. Whatever distances the heart, I have brought here. A deer rises onto her haunches to reach for an apple, though many fallen apples are on the ground. Chance darkened me. Chance darkened me as a morning darkens, preparing to rain. It goes against its arc, betrays its clock hands. The day was a dark-eyed giraffe, its unfathomable legs kept walking. A person is not a day, not rain, no gentle eater of high leaves. I did not keep walking. The day inside me, legs and lungs, kept walking. Now a darkness is coming. I hold my life with two hands. I walk with two legs. 2 years are enough to hear Bach with. Blinded in one eye, a person sees with the other. Now a great darkness is coming. A both eyes darkness. I have one mouth. It holds two words. Yes, no. Inside all others. Yes, no, no, yes. I say yes to these words as I must, and I also refuse them. My two legs shape to go forward, obedient to can't, know, and must be, walk into the time that is coming. This is another poem that just zeroes in a moment of extraordinary clarity and beauty. She breathes in the sand. As the front of a box would miss the sides, the back, the grief of the living misses the grief of the dead. It is like a woman who goes to the airport to meet the planes from another country she long lived in. She knows no passenger but stands near as they exit, still holding their passports. She breathes in the scent of their clothes. Practice. I touch my toes. When I was a child, this was difficult. Now I touch my toes daily. In 2012, in Sanburg, Florida, someone nearby was touching her toes before bed. 3 weeks ago, in the Philippines or Myanmar, someone was stretching. Tomorrow, someone else, somewhere else, will bend first to one side, then the other. I also do 10 push-ups morning and evening. Women push-ups from the knees. They resemble certain forms of religious bowing. In place of 1, 2, 4, 7, I count the names of incomprehension. Sanford, Ferguson, Charleston, Aleppo, Sarajevo, Nagasaki. I never reach Troy or I have done this for years now. Bystander, listener, one of the lucky. I do not seem to grow stronger. Cataclysm. It begins subtly. The maple withdraws an inch from the birch tree. The porcupine wants nothing to do with the stink. Fish unschool, sheep unflock to separately graze. Clouds, meanwhile, declare to the sky they have nothing to do with the sky, which is not visible as they are, nor knows the trick of turning into infant, tumbling pterodactyls. The turtles and the moonlight, their long arrangement is over. As for the humans, let us not speak of humans. Let us speak of their language. The first person singular condemns the second person plural. For betrayals, neither has words left to name. The fed consider the hungry and stay silent. Do I have time for one more? Yeah. The last one. Okay. On the fifth day. On the fifth day, the scientists who studied the rivers were forbidden to speak or to study the rivers. The scientists who studied the air were told not to speak of the air. And the ones who worked for the farmers were silenced. And the ones who worked for the bees. Someone from deep in the Badlands began posting facts. The facts were told not to speak and were taken away. The facts, surprised to be taken, were silent. Now it was only the rivers that spoke of the rivers, and only the wind that spoke of its bees, while the unpausing factual buds of the fruit trees continued to move towards the fruit. The silence spoke loudly of silence, and the rivers kept speaking of rivers, of boulders and air. Bound to gravity, earless and tongueless, the untested rivers kept speaking. Bus drivers, shelf stockers, code writers, machinists, accountants, lab techs, cellists kept speaking. They spoke. The fifth day of silence. Thank you so much.
So, Mona, thank you for such a nice presentation, and thank you for introducing Jane Hirshfield. Or Polyman, please.
Well, thank you, Mona. You introduced us to a wonderful poet, and you know, the mindfulness of this poet is totally connected with her environment. Every poem that you have read has something to do with the world around her. And, you know, she's a Zen poet also, but she always said that she was a human poet before she was a Zen poet. And somehow listening today to these great poets, I feel comforted that what I write is meaningful after all, because this is what life is about, you know, whether you're writing about your city, the working class in the city, or whether you're writing about, like R.S. Thomas, you're writing about the peasant, she's writing about every little environment. For example, the poet that you have just read, Jane Hirshfield, I mean, the trees, for example, the river, the water, I mean, every little thing matters. And it's been a wonderful evening of poetry. And I can only thank you and feel very honored. As Neil says, we are speechless. We're truly speechless. Thank you so much, dear poet. And keep coming, and we keep hearing you again and again.
Indeed, we are speechless, and why before closing down, why can't we take Neil's comment? Neil, please go ahead and talk about the show.
Yeah, well, this is the first time I'm attending, so you know I'll certainly be back again. It's a great bunch of poets you put together, and I was struck by the wide range of choice of the poets they in turn chose. So some of them my favorites. So particularly, I have to say Margaret Atwood. I grew up on her, and Carl Sanburg as well. So yeah, it's fun.
Thank you,
Mhm.
and thank you, Lennart. You have, you know, came up and you shared your willingness to join to talk about your friend Carl Sandburg. And thank you, Marianne, for introducing, and Mona, you as well. Margaret, we're always together.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, viewers, for watching, and keep watching. We don't know who would be talking about who, and please, I look forward for the announcement that we make. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you,
Thank you, Ross.
everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.